Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
Today, I'm joined by Marlee Kohn, Vice President of ESG at Starlight Investments. With over 14 years of experience in the building sector, Marlee has built a career at the intersection of real estate and sustainability, leading strategy, driving impactful programs, and shaping how companies approach environmental, social, and governance priorities. Recognized as a Clean50 Emerging Leader, Marlee brings both deep technical expertise and a passion for creating meaningful change. From her early work at Oxford Properties to her leadership at Starlight, she is focused on issues ranging from climate and energy to resident engagement, well-being, and social impact. In our conversation today, we'll dive into some of the most pressing topics in ESG, from the new disclosure requirements under Bill C-59 to net zero commitments, low carbon retrofits, financing and resilience, and the importance of winning investor and senior leadership buy-in to move these initiatives forward. We'll also take a closer look at Marlee's career journey and how her experiences have shaped her approach to leadership in the real estate industry. Good morning, we finally made it at long last. How many months has this been in the making?
I think just a handful.
Just a
couple. Small handful.
And now we're in the fall.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so good to have you with us. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Very much looking forward to having this conversation with you today. We're going to break it down into two parts. So part one, we're going to dive into ESG and how it's impacting the industry. And then in the second part, we're going to look a little bit more closely at your career and some of the reflections that you have from your journey and what you wish to share with our audience today. So diving into the ESG part, let's look at social impact and inclusive development to begin. So I know resident engagement is something that you care a lot about. It's close to your heart. When you think about meaningful engagement, Marlee, not just ticking the box, what does that actually look like?
It's a great question because I think that when it comes to resident engagement, there's lots of reflection. And I truly believe it starts with listening. Not just sending out a survey and calling it a day, but really creating that space for that two-way dialogue, those two-way conversations between, yourselves as the owner, the manager of the properties, and the people who are living in them. We do this through community events, education sessions. When I bring up those surveys, we do them regularly. It's also in those informal chats with the residents and the different property teams. And that's where you hear what's really going on when you actually, you know, have those conversations. The only challenge with that really is the scale. So, every community is different. So it's not one size fits all. We found that if you build, that flexible framework, though, something that worked in one building tends to often work in another. It can be adapted elsewhere, but you do have to be mindful of the different people that you're working with, and that you're trying to learn from as well. So the key is really making sure those residents feel heard and see real change based on their feedback. And if I just thinking a bit further, one example that comes to mind is Ivan's Garden of Hope. This was a book actually that our leadership came up with in thinking about how to better engage with certain residents across different areas. And it essentially is a children's book celebrating community life in a multi-residential setting, and it was distributed to thousands of families across our residences. It's actually, I think they're in the works of making a second one. And yeah, and so I think that was a really unique approach and something I'm proud of our team for doing, because I think that it brought certain elements of the multi-residential world to life that you don't typically get to see or experience. And it was like proud for the residents. I found when we did distribute that, they felt this connection and that their story was being told as well.
Mm,
So,
yeah, yeah, they would
yeah,
definitely feel heard.
yeah.
Just to give everyone a sense of like the scale and size of the operation when we talk about the residents and the buildings and the portfolio, the properties, like what is the scale?
Yeah, so we manage, so Starlight is the largest multi-residential owner, privately held owner across Canada. And that's 70,000 suites, 70,000 units, and in various markets and areas, neighborhoods, different types of communities, and different types of residents that make up those spaces, whether it's, students, newcomers to Canada, people who've been here a long time trying to, make their mark in the world. So I think it's really nice to connect with those people and
Yeah.
demonstrate to them that we're interested in their stories.
Yeah, that's a lot of books going to print, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Where do you see the biggest gaps right now in how the real estate industry is approaching social impact?
I think when people think about social impact, it's hard to define because it means something to different. It means something different to different people. It's still often treated also like an add-on. These buzzwords come up when we talk around sustainability or ESG. The title itself, ESG, is a buzzword. Environmental social governance. What does that social part really mean? And I think that our industry, the real estate industry, is still very much trying to figure it out. And whether you're a leader in the space or you're, budding entrepreneur, I think that the way you define it really has to go back to who your stakeholders are. So we always say that social impact needs to be baked into the planning process. It can't just be something that's later layered on. And I think that what we're trying to do here at Starlight is undertake our new strategy around social impact. It's not to say that we're not doing great things. It just means that we're at a phase or a point right now where we need to think a bit bigger and what that impact looks like. So while small actions, I definitely agree with small actions making an impact and especially doing them at scale and finding what might work. And when I say small actions, I mean anything from, again, conducting these surveys or having resident engagement events like barbecues and sustainability focused, energy day or waste reduction week are, at the properties. Um, but when we talk about, bigger or what does it look like when we mean like embedding social impact, it means more genuine partnerships with the communities, ensuring that it's not just like a transactional relationship. Um, and so really looking at from the different stakeholder lens, and you're starting to hear, well, I guess in the last 5 years, maybe even a bit longer, we started to hear things around this alternative capitalism, like inclusive capitalism or balanced capitalism. And really what that is trying to get at the heart of is looking at it from different angles and not just, oh, what is going to make money, but really what benefits all stakeholders. And maybe what is going to make money makes sense for all stakeholders, sure, but defining that, in the ways that make sense for all the people involved. So anyway, so I see that as something.
Yeah, that's great. Um, one of the things I was thinking of as you were speaking was just how you've had the diversity in different asset classes, right? So at Oxford, obviously there was multifamily, but there was also industrial office and retail. And now being at Starlight, you're very focused on the residential side. I just wondered, like, where are the crossovers, or what have you seen the differences in social impacts when you're maybe working with a tenant in a AAA asset versus you're working with a resident at one of your properties? And what have you sort of learned from both?
Very different. I think we have to remind ourselves of that. And I think for a long time, previous to joining Starlight, when I was at Oxford, I don't think I fully appreciated it. And I mean, I guess this naturally happens too as you grow up and learn, that I wanted it to be a cookie cutter approach. I wanted there to be a way to marry the things that we're doing in the office space or with industrial um, tenants and put that into like the multi-residential space. But it's very different because you're dealing with people who um, live and they might even be working right now in their residence versus people who are coming into the office and doing their job. So you try and marry the different or make connections. While there definitely are some, you also have to think about how that tenant or that customer on the office side has their own business goals, their own business strategy at play that they're trying to do. And I would often say it's a little bit easier to have the conversation around a shared sustainability goal or what impact you want to create together. And often in the real estate space or commercial real estate in Canada, at least, it was often those tenants in the office world that would help dictate or move the needle forward on sustainability. Whereas in multi-residential, um, it is a bit more balanced and that two-way discussion or that dialogue that you need to have to understand what someone's personal goals might be or what they want in their building and in their space and what they want to get out of that. So a bit different.
Bit different indeed, yeah. Let's move on to net zero commitments, right? So, I mean, net zero has become that rallying cry. Where do you see the biggest opportunities to actually move the needle? And is it in retrofits? Is it financial modeling? Is it something entirely different? What do you think?
I think retrofits is definitely a big one, especially for our older buildings, older existing buildings, which makes up the majority of our buildings here at Starlight. We tend to buy older stock buildings and renovate them to the best of our ability, especially around the energy, water, um, improvements. That's definitely been a big focus. Like just I think what we calculated for our latest sustainability report, I think it was about 1.5 billion in building renovations over the last 5 years. So just to give you that magnitude of when we first purchased that building, the goal or the valuation is to see what improvements can be made to make these living conditions better for the people who are living in them, and make the building last and stronger. And you do that through small, I wouldn't say small, but the low hanging fruit like the energy efficiency projects, the water reduction projects, or water efficiency. Um, while the retrofits is quite significant, you once you start getting into the conversation around decarbonizing, so once you've moved past that low hanging fruit, like I said, the decarbonizing, which is essentially switching out your natural gas systems with your two electric ones, that is when it becomes a little bit trickier of a conversation, and the financial modeling really has to come into play. And when it comes to financing, there are government funding opportunities like tax credits, as well. And we're starting to see more creative models like energy as a service, green bonds, utility partnerships. That really helps unlock the scale and that the case for the project. But the financing does become a bit of a bottleneck. There's lots, as you might imagine, when it comes to government funding opportunities. It's not the easiest to necessarily navigate, or you might need particular resources in order to make something happen, or you really have to dig into what that tax credit entails, and the different partnerships you might have across those the that. So there are different opportunities, but we have to put in the work to understand what will work best for the projects, and that takes time and effort.
And I guess in terms of what's the toughest challenge there, is it finding the cash? Is it finding the money? Or is it scaling those technical solutions to put in the retrofits and to develop forward on the buildings?
If I had to choose, I would definitely say the money. Technical solutions exist, they're getting better. but without the right financial setup, especially balancing that, capital expenditure and your operating expenses, that's where, you have the big challenge around, just to give you an example, for us at least, what I hear from some of our investments team is that, getting the capital is easy. I mean, they're oversimplifying, but they're saying getting the capital is easy. It's ensuring the payback is there. And then when they look at the operating costs, um, that has to remain steady. So it's hard to justify fuel switching when like our electricity costs are higher than gas right now. So I think that poses a challenge for sure.
Let's talk about resilience and future proofing. So, beyond carbon, resilience is becoming massive. How should owners be thinking about future proofing their portfolios against climate and as well as market risks?
So for me, resilience is really about being proactive. I guess that's the true essence of the the term. And we're working closely with our insurance and risk teams who understand this, I think, the best, to run those scenario analysis, looking at everything from the physical perils like flooding and heat exposure to regulatory shifts. We're also building resilience plans for our properties so they're better equipped to handle disruptions. And when I say that we're doing these things, like, it has been a process, it has been a journey. So a few years ago, when we embarked on doing or committing ourselves to running climate risk analysis, you go at it from a geographical sense, a portfolio wide sense, and then once you get your feet wet, you understand, okay, well, this is where our risks are. This is the geographies we need to focus on. These are the types of properties we need to focus on. This is the type of physical risk we're dealing with. This is the transitional risk we're looking at, that risk with climate change. And then you go deeper. And so we're at that stage now where we're going a bit deeper and factoring in what we think is valuable, which is the climate value at risk idea. So looking at what that cost is, that actual cost to that risk, again, estimated on assumptions, but at least we have that idea that we can then bring to our leadership team and say, okay, we can be proactive in this area. It might cost us this. So let's think about that more seriously.
Now, one of the benefits of the positions that you've been in and the companies you work for is they have global presence, right? So even at Starlight, you've got holdings in the US, my understanding is in the UK, and then looking at Oxford, which has a huge global footprint. You're dealing in these other sectors and these other places around the world. So my question is, like, bringing that inside of Canada, like, what can we learn from what you have seen around the globe?
Mm-hmm. I think in working closely with our risk and insurance teams who have seen or have that global perspective, I think that they have been ahead of the curve when it comes to risk modeling, and the different systems that they use. Again, global systems that they're able to tap into. What I have found in the Canadian space, that we don't have as much data as our US counterparts, our European counterparts, for example. And I think that has been challenging for us when it comes to understanding the various risks that we're working off of. Because again, when you're talking risk, sure, you're talking to be proactive, but you're working off of a lot of estimated values. And you need good data in order to be able to understand that. So I think things have moved things are moving, but I do think where we can get some support is that tech industry can also help in this area. We've been looking at different software systems and how they're accurately mapping and providing a better proxy for that climate value at risk that I was just mentioning. So I think we can really learn from this.
In terms of disclosure and greenwashing, so Bill C-59 is about to really shake things up. How do you see that changing the conversation around transparency, and what can real estate companies do to avoid that greenwashing label?
I agree with you. It is about to shake things up. I think it already has. I think maybe to a fault when it came around. And even though they're still trying to understand and I would say implement this bill to really see it in practice, uh, people have taken that step back, or companies have taken that step back to, while and taking the time to figure it out. So I think it's definitely a big shift. Companies are being asked to move from these glossy storytelling reports to real accountability. And I think that's being noticed by the market, and definitely people have taken that shift voluntarily. I would say we were ahead of the curve before this came around, because it has always been something that has been ingrained in the sustainability professionals around being honest and transparent and having data to back it up. So I do think it's a good thing, but I worry some will pull back out of fear, afraid of being accused of greenwashing if they share goals that haven't been fully met. So we need to find that balance. That transparency doesn't mean perfection. It means being honest about where you are and where you're headed. And I think that it was the approach, sorry, I think that is the approach that we took with our report in this last cycle, because we thought to ourselves, okay, these are the things that we're saying. We crossed our T's, dotted our I's, and then we took it to various people across our organization, including our legal group, including various leadership around risk, and they took a finer tooth comb through it and really said, okay, is this exactly what you mean? Is this the project that you're really working on and you're getting these results? And so it just sort of forced us to reflect a little bit more on it, which I think was a really helpful exercise, because it showed us that other perspective, and not just, okay, well, we have the data, of course that's enough. So
It's great that you have all those additional resources to call upon in-house. There are smaller operators, many of them across the GTA, and they don't have the same level of resource as maybe the bigger firms. So like, how do they navigate all of this without just falling behind? What do they do?
absolutely. The smaller players definitely need support. And we've had some of those conversations with them. And this is where I think industry groups can help with the templates, the tools, shared learning. Collaboration is key, especially with new regulations or new trends in the space. And especially in the sustainability real estate groups across Canada, we're used to the sharing of best practices. We're used to that collaboration. So understanding the differences between intentional and unintentional greenwashing, as an example, is a good starting point for these smaller players. It helps companies figure out what's okay to disclose and how to do it responsibly. So those are even some of the initial conversations that we're having as a group, to collaborate a little bit more on this.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about now getting buy-in. What's worked for you when it comes to building trust with senior leadership and the investors on these ESG initiatives? I can't imagine it's always been a walk in the park. So, what would you have to say about that?
You're bang on. I think thinking about this, if I were, I guess, to start the conversation, I believe it starts with alignment. I think that ESG or sustainability can't be a side project. It can't be seen as that. It has to be connected to the core business strategy. That sounds overwhelming, or I guess maybe a bit esoteric, but um, when we bring leaders from across the company into the process, so the goals we set are shared and not siloed. So you have to work at it, um, and meet people where they're at. And I think that that is something that takes a lot of time and effort. And like I said, as before, you want to apply this cookie cutter approach. You want to think that it, one framework might make sense, but it doesn't. You're really dealing with people and how they want to run their business, and you have to meet them there and show them where ESG fits in. I also think that like data is a huge thing when it comes to this conversation. So when you can show how ESG drives performance, it's reducing risks, it's building that brand value, people tend to pay attention, and it's why they paid attention initially in this conversation. In the beginning years of sustainability in real estate, it was all about energy efficiency because it made sense financially, it made sense to the people. And then it sort of morphed into the various other elements and became this like catch-all of everything that falls under environmental impact, everything that fits under social and the people and the different stakeholders, and then how you're governing that sort of underpins your ESG. So what ends up happening though when it becomes that catch-all, it's overwhelming, and people tend to think, leaders tend to think it's about doing the right thing. But it's not just about doing the right thing, it's about doing the smart thing. And while that might be a driver for people when business is good, it doesn't hold up when business dips, as an example of what we're experiencing right now. So educating on those risks and opportunities keeps that drive going.
And I mean, people are going to want to drive the bus in different ways, right? And I guess who is driving? Who's driving change right now? Is this investors or is it regulators? Who do you think it is?
Investors, okay. Hands down. I think right now, I think that, and in our space specifically, and why I use that caveat is regulators are catching up in the markets. I think that when you talk Europe, they've caught up faster, but you're even seeing a little bit of a dip when it comes to regulation and how it's being adopted and implemented in those markets. And here, we've seen that regulation catching up, but it's slow and it can definitely be politicized. So you have different leadership at the helm of some of those regulations that are coming through that can, pull it back a little bit or push it forward, right? The investors who stay focused, though, even when the market shifts, those are the ones driving the real change. And so that's why I always bring it back to the investors. And we want them to be thinking long term because it helps us. And that's the mindset we need more of.
And if you want them thinking long term, and you've mentioned a number of times through this section around data points and how important those are, what advice would you give around what are the most impactful data points that you're focusing in on to bring about influence, to bring about change from investors?
All data points. Data is at the foundation of our sustainability efforts. So it's anything from anything to do with how the building operates and how it's performing from an energy, water perspective, waste, occupancy, the vacancy in the building, the value of the building. I think that matters to the conversation. So that's what I mean when I talk about some of those data points and having those there and demonstrating the connection between them. So if we focus our efforts on, energy efficiency, how does that impact the value, and knowing where that opportunity is on the value side. I think that has proven to be a big conversation in our real estate space, but I don't think our industry has really wrapped its head around like the full valuation model in incorporating sustainability metrics, or what we deem as sustainability metrics, but really it's just all this data. I think that just like how you consider like amenity spaces, fitness centers in your building, or putting you know lounge spaces or breakout rooms for people to work from home with, those how those are evaluated, we have to also think outside the box or more creatively on some of these other factors that go into running a building and making it work for the people who live in it.
All right, we made it to the end of part one. We can take a big deep breath. Well done. That was great. Lots of good takeaways, lots of great insights. Thank you for sharing.
Are you looking for a specialized recruiting partner to connect you with the people who perform in commercial real estate? At Highview, we partner with some of Canada's leading real estate companies. From national landlords, institutional investors, REITs and service providers, to local developers, third parties, and private family businesses. We are passionate about the Canadian real estate industry and enjoy discussing what's happening in the market. We also provide insight and advice on hiring trends, compensation benchmarking, career roadmaps, networking opportunities, and much more. Visit us at highviewpartners.ca or contact us directly to discover how we can connect you to people who perform.
Moving on now to the part that I know you really enjoy, which is talking about yourself.
Okay, we're done. We're done here.
We're done. Cut it. It's a wrap. We're going to talk about your career and your reflections from your career. And we'll start with, let's start with your personal journey. So you built your career right at that intersection of real estate with sustainability. You could have gone in many directions, but you chose to combine the two. So take me back. What first pulled you into this space and what keeps you going?
Admittedly, it was a bit of luck being in the right place at the right time. I was working for a consulting group, fresh out of completing my master's program fittingly in environmental science. And we had Oxford was our client, and they wanted to run a program around tenant engagement and sustainability. And I didn't know anything about real estate. I was I didn't know anything about tenant engagement either. And I think the team took a chance on me because I showed passion, I showed a willingness to learn, and I think it was new for everyone as well. So I think that really combined together, that we were sort of learning it together, both on the Oxford client side and on the consulting group side. So I sort of fell into this real estate world, and I I know this sounds corny, but I fell in love. I saw a group of people that were passionate but driven, and it aligned with my values. It made sense. And once I got into it, I just saw how much potential there was to make that difference within the Canadian landscape. And then it just, kind of blows up from there, because you start to see, your Oxford sort of took me in different global directions as well, too.
If I got $1 for every time somebody's told me they just fell into this industry, I'd be a very, very wealthy man by now. But no, you made some really valid points there, and it just has such a ripple effect. Yes, we're working with buildings and we're working with assets, but we're also working with people's lives, and whether that's at home or whether that's in the workplace as well. So there's definitely impact to be had, and when you find a group of collective people that you can collaborate with that feel the same and want to move things in the same direction. And I wonder how that has changed, like your definition of impact. How has that evolved over the years that you've been in the industry?
It has evolved. Yes. And I'm happy it has, because if it hadn't, I would be a bit worried that I haven't learned a goddamn thing. So I would say, at first, I would say that I saw impact through a very technical lens. Um, I tend to see, think that when something is new for me, I tend to think like, I can't possibly understand this. This is too much for me, beyond my understanding. How am I going to dive into this? So I think right away my mind goes to, this is a lot. But as you sort of scale that back, you realize you can really tackle it. So why I bring that up is that I think that's what sort of drove me to think that this space was very technical. It was because if I don't understand it, it must be super technical, and I'm not super technical. And so I saw sustainability and real estate through metrics, running pilots and getting data through spreadsheets. Like, that was, I feel like, that my world. And while I'm happy that that's my foundation, because it taught me how to become more technical, how to think about those metrics, and how to measure success, essentially, or measure the various projects. But now I see that it's something so much bigger, and that sustainability is about connecting business strategy to those human outcomes, or creating those connections like we were talking about before. So, for example, like, decarbonizing a building isn't just good for the environment, it's good for the people living in it. And I think that often we get lost in some of these technical things, and, oh, this is going to benefit, climate change is just benefiting the earth. And you sort of forget about why we're doing this and why we want to reduce those emissions, why we care about making our buildings more efficient. It's so that they can last, so that people can live in them, so that they can function properly, so people can breathe better air. So you sort of, I think that's what keeps many of us going, is understanding that human connection. And so I think over time I realized that impact is not just about the metrics, it's about the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's improving lives, right? For the better. Um, when it comes to like defining moments in your career, like looking back, are there any particular projects or initiatives that have really stood out for you where you felt like your work was really making a difference? It was really driving change and impact.
Yeah, good question. I'm smiling because I think that when you first hear this, you think, oh, I can't think of something, that I did alone, and how do I, not sound like I was the one driving this, when the reality is like so many people influence you in the business to do things and push you forward. Um, but I will. One thing that comes to mind is when I first joined Starlight.
It's okay. You can
No,
blow
but
your own trumpet for a second. It's all good. We give
I
you
think
permission.
that when I first joined Starlight, um, they'd hired me for a reason. They hired me because they wanted to create a formal sustainability or ESG strategy. And uh, I had no relationships. I had no connection to the business yet. I didn't know where anyone really stood on sustainability. I quickly found that out, yes. But I didn't know any of this. And I needed to learn and help build something that meant something to our people. And it it sounded daunting, but I was also so excited about it because I was never in that position before. But then when I really scaled back and realized, like, I had spent the 10 years prior to that trying to do that, trying to connect with people to make sustainability mean something to them. So I sort of harnessed my learning, what worked, what didn't. And I said, okay, we need to go out and I need to run workshops across the company. I need to talk to every single team, every department, every individual at Starlight. Then I said, I also need to talk to every third party partner. I need to talk to all our vendors. I need to talk to all the people who run our buildings. The only way for me to understand where we stand and how to create a strategy is if we get in a room with everyone. And I don't think I even realized at the time how much I would learn. And so it taught me that if you make the time to build those connections and those relationships and listen to the people, alluding, we talked about that earlier with residents as well, you 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 think you might have some outcomes, you think you might learn some things, but then it ends up being so much more expansive. And I think that project, if you will, it sort of morphed into the beginnings of like what this strategy would be. And from there, we truly built everything out of that. We built our sustainability action plans. We set all our targets. We created our commitments. Like everything came out of those workshops. And it sort of, I wouldn't say it was easy. Of course, when you always look back, it seems easier than when you're in it. But it sort of was that it seemed to connect, and there was that smooth um, journey following. I say smooth lightly again because I'm probably forgetting all of the all of the headwinds, but I think that made a big difference, and I think it's taught me to approach our strategy like that now with everything.
I mean, there are so many people coming at this from so many different angles, and you put all those perspectives together, and everyone's seeing the portfolio from a different space as well, right? And everyone's starting at different levels in terms of their knowledge and their understanding and what they're applying, what they're putting into action or they're not putting into action. So sort of having that round table across the business, we talked about who brings about change, but even when you're at that level of just setting the framework, having everyone in the business contributing, collaborating, sharing their voice, that can be really powerful and have a lot of impact. Yeah, very cool. Okay. Well, moving from those defining moments into the tough stuff, the challenging ones, ESG, it can definitely be an uphill battle at times. And, I've spoken to so many candidates at all levels on this. And I guess what I'm interested to understand from you is what would be that tough challenge that you faced when it came to driving change, and how did you go about pushing through that? What did you do?
Most projects are an uphill battle, right? So sustainability, though, I think is held, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but in living through this, sustainability is often held at a higher standard than a lot of, um, or I say projects within sustainability are held at that higher standard because often people hear the word sustainability and they automatically think this is going to cost me more. This is an add-on. But the reality is that it is not, and it is a differentiator, and it could add opportunity, or there could be opportunity there. And so we have to prove that value, that long-term risk and opportunity that I was talking about when it comes to sustainability measures. So like getting buy-in for a climate risk assessment was tough as an example. We said to our teams, to our steering committee here at Starlight, we said we need to do a climate risk assessment. I needed to explain what that would entail. I needed to demonstrate that it wasn't mandatory. So I couldn't just say, well, in order to comply with X regulation, we need to do this. So that would have been easy. Then everyone would say, sure, you have to do it. So people needed to really understand what that value and what it could understand the value and what it could bring. But I knew, and I needed. What's challenging about this is that I knew investors were going to start asking about it. I knew we needed to make the business case around this, and I knew we wanted to get ahead of it. It's very challenging to try to be proactive when you can't definitively say to your team, this is coming and people are going to start noticing this or caring about this. And then because you have to be very confident that 100% is coming, which is not, as we've seen, is not always the case. You might think it's coming because you're talking in your industry groups and people are saying, oh, the regulation is coming, they're going to announce it, or there might be intel or insight. And then, again, becomes politicized and it falls through or it gets put on hold. So you can't really always know until it really happens. And often that's what, your teams want to hear, that definitive answer. So I think that because with this as an example, like the climate risk assessment, because I knew it was coming, I was able to clearly state that for people. I had to demonstrate to them, like, this is what, our European counterparts are doing and our European investors might care about versus what we're hearing here. Like, I had to find the small, I shouldn't say small, but every single example that I could find in order to make the case for that. So just to give you that in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to how you handled that project at that time, would you do it in the same way? Is there anything that you would do differently in hindsight, looking back?
I think I would. I think I would bring people in earlier. I think that when, going back to what I was saying about sustainability being held at a higher standard, there's so much education involved in it at the same time. So while you're learning about it and trying to make the case for it, you also have to be educating everyone else and collaborating together on it and seeing that. So I sometimes find this could be a challenge for sustainability professionals such as myself, because you're also deemed as a subject matter expert and you're supposed to have all the answers or um, that decision making ability on your own. But what I think I've learned is that if you bring people in earlier, you show them that you have learned something, you have that expertise on this, let's say in this space, but it's something new, a new trend or a new regulation that might be coming, or a new way of looking at analyzing, climate risk in this instance. And you have to demonstrate that to people early on. And it's okay if it's collaborative. Like, you need those champions, you need those people. You cannot change is not good on its own and by yourself. You need it collectively.
So the evolving landscape is ever changing. And when you think how far the industry has come since you started your career, what's been for you the most significant shifts? And also what still needs work?
I think it's safe to say ESG has become mainstream. I know that when I was first starting out, I wouldn't say like I was at the pioneer stages of sustainability in real estate, but it was still early on enough where when I had first started, we were moving out of this conversation around it just being about energy and waste and reducing water, and trying to look at like more impactful and holistic measures related to sustainability. um, but it is at this point in that mainstream conversation and among business professionals. We hear it on investor calls, it's in agendas, it's tenant expectations, so we know it's there. But it is still treated as like a separate track. It's treated as separately, and it's not um, consistently woven into our decisions across all our business decisions. And I think that it's not understood yet in that way. I think in some areas, some companies, in the real estate space are trying to move it there. And we're part of that, where we're trying to embed it a little bit more differently. So we sort of look at our journey. We say, okay, at Starlight, from those first workshops where we knew nothing, to creating various targets, living through those goals and those targets, and what has worked, what hasn't, where we can scale, where we cannot, while also growing as an organization. I think that then like ESG kind of has to fall along that growth. And so I think that can be challenging for people
Yeah.
when it's always just looked at as like, oh, this is just like that add-on.
Yeah, thanks for that. And with that being said, if we're now to start looking ahead into the future, 5 years, 10 years from now, we're sitting in 2035, net zero targets around the corner. There's obviously going to be a lot of big conversations that are coming up around this. For you, looking ahead, like what is going to reshape the ESG conversation in the next 10 years? Like what can we expect? What's coming our way?
I really love that you asked that question, because we need to be thinking long term when it comes to sustainability and that evolution. We, in the sustainability real estate space, we're used to that roller coaster of ups and downs, whether it be around regulation or economic influences. We have to understand that that climate change is still going to be a risk. And just because we can't find the right financial measures to make it work at this time, we have to be thinking about what that opportunity looks like. And so I really think this, and I don't want to call it necessarily just an idea, but social impact, I think, will take the forefront. People will start to see that climate change is still that very much a risk to our society. Many are already seeing that, but when it comes to the business perspective, I think that will be really woven into our business decisions, especially as we have to think about what that low carbon economy might look like and how we're going to respond to that risk. And I think we just got a touch of it. And we tend to, in sustainability real estate, take it up there, let everybody know, and we start working on those things. And then there's a little bit of a headwind, and we get back into it. So I think people will see that connection more clearly. I'm confident that, in those 10 years, like it'll all be married together. 10 years is not that long, but it is also long when that risk is getting worse and worse. It's getting stronger and stronger. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but like we need to jump on top of it. And usually, as human race, we tend to jump on it when the risk is high.
Yeah, time is certainly not slowing down by any means. And, 10 years from now, we'll be knocking on the door before we know it. For real estate executives who want to make ESG a bigger part of their business, but are perhaps just feeling overwhelmed by all the moving pieces and all the different business units, where would you tell them to get started? Where's the beginning of this?
Start with materiality. It helps you figure out what matters most and what doesn't. And I think if you take the time to clearly identify what matters to your core business, your portfolio, the people across your organization, the data you have, how you want to perform, benchmarking, setting targets, like all of that relates back to materially understanding what matters most to you, your organization, but then how you impact those stakeholders and what stakeholders care about. So I think if you start there, that sort of sets the stage of the things you need to care about, the things you need to prioritize. So you need the vision, but also the tools to bring it to life. So that's why I say like start with materiality, and it's good to have that vision. But then you also have to think about the software and the technology out there to help support you. And you do have to vet through that. And again, being in the sustainability space, there's a lot of catch-all, if you will, types of software that say, we can run this, and this, connect these dots for you. And you do have to navigate through that and find what works best for your organization and your goals.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of our fingertips, but you got to be strategic, right, when you're making these decisions. You talked earlier about long-term sustainable view, perspective. And with that, like, how can these leaders in our industry balance those short-term business pressures with the long-term ESG goals? How do you do that?
Yeah, so feeding off of that conversation, I can't stress it enough that when it comes to ESG and sustainability, it is part mindset, part execution, and when the economy dips, you cannot abandon your ESG goals. I think that right away, because that's how honestly, in your organization, whether it is just an add-on for you versus not, when those times are rough, and whether the market is dictating that or your investors are dictating that, or if it has been truly embedded in your organization. And so when right away, what tends to happen, when the economy is not great, you tend to tighten up, of course, but you have to keep that long-term vision alive. And you can do that. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily prioritize it and keep it at the forefront. But if you don't keep that vision there, if you don't focus or focus maybe or hone in on some of the things that are low cost to no cost measures, or maybe there's more planning because you want to do it right, you'll be scrambling to catch up later. You'll be scrambling when things get back to normal or things go in a different direction and you're stuck sort of where you landed before or where you left off. And so we're now trying to navigate, for instance, I'll use like decarbonizing. Like we had great opportunity, we had a carbon tax. There's Sure, it wasn't the best and it wasn't executed amazingly, and there's qualms with that, but at the end of the day, it helped with the financial modeling and it made sense. And when you lose that, you have to go back to the drawing board a little bit more. It doesn't mean you abandon your strategy around it or your goals around it. We haven't scaled back on our net zero target. It is a long-term target and vision. You have to anticipate that there are these headwinds and there are these dips. And so it's a matter of like what you do with that at those times that help you, when the times get better.
Yeah, that's what's going to make a difference for sure. Yeah, thank you. So moving on to emerging leaders, I'm curious to know, are you mentoring anyone at this time, or is that part of your remit or your passion?
Yes, definitely. It's funny because I still think of myself as a mentee. So, I mean, I guess we never stop growing in that sense. No, but I do. participate both like formally and informally. I think like we have a great program here at Starlight that I participate in, and then also as a mentor. And then, informally, some of those past mentorship relationships have, while they've morphed into friendships and relationships there, I think I still try to stay connected to those emerging leaders. So yes, if anyone is interested, I'm always open to mentorship. It played a huge part in my beginning years and still does. So I value that immensely.
Yeah, it's definitely played a huge part in like most of the leaders that I speak to in real estate. It made a big difference on their career. So, well, maybe you're going to mentor a few people out there today in the next few minutes. So, advice for the next generation, emerging leaders. So, those that are looking to, they've got big aspirations, big goals, ambitions. They're coming into this industry. Maybe they're a few years in the door and they want to shape the future of real estate through ESG, through sustainability. What is your advice for them making their mark?
Listen and learn. I think that being humble and having that humility goes a long way, not just from the perception of others, but also in what you receive back. Because if you let your guard down, if you let yourself learn and truly listen to what people are saying, that will go a much longer way than you trying to be the loudest voice in the room or make your mark that way. And I think that it's taken me a while to get there as well, because I think that um, you hear you hear that advice, you hear that it's important to have humility, um, but you have to make that your own. You have to make that work for you, and you have to understand it. So what I would layer on top of that is being a connector. So the way to learn, especially in the sustainability space, is about bringing ideas together and teams together and talking that through. So it's not just being part of like industry conversations, but it's bringing, different departments or business lines together to collaborate on something or to get different perspectives on. And so even you just facilitating that conversation between people, and you're there as a facilitator, as someone to listen and take notes and then reflect on that, and what you're going to do with that definitely matters. But you have to work off of that, and you can't assume that you know everything. And I'm not implying that I necessarily did. I just feel as though they're, especially in the sustainability space, there's so much uncharted territory. There is so much that hasn't been tackled and that you think maybe has, or you think you've even tackled it. You're like, oh, this makes sense. And then, like, you wake up one day and you're like, oh, wait, that makes no sense anymore. I don't have this I don't have this, again, regulation or this champion to go after this anymore. And so you really have to be able to understand that sustainability being the how it's been built up and how it's become its own little microcosm as part of the grander real estate space. Like, then there is always that opportunity to learn and listen and build from
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. Yeah, totally. No, it's a really powerful way to wrap up our conversation, and that is, listening. Listening isn't passive. It's a powerhouse skill that is going to help to build trust. It's going to deepen your understanding and also the understanding of others, and it really helps to unlock real connection and relationships. And that's been a theme through this podcast. If we're going to bring about change, we really need to work on the connections and the relationships that we're building, both in our team, company, and also across the industry. What a great conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I do think, it can be uncomfortable at times to talk about yourself and that journey, but it's also quite uplifting, to talk to someone who understands and who respects the space. I think that, and respects, you want to hear, you want to listen, and it's just hard because I also want to do that. So I'm looking like right away, like what feedback, like what do you think about this as well? So,
Yeah.
but it's good. That's exactly what this conversation
Exactly.
needs.
That's your collaborative nature. I think it's been a great conversation. It's been a really nice balance between, insights and what's happening and what's going on out there. And then we sort of bring that in to your career and the actions you've taken, and, it just feels a bit more practical. We can feel it now. Through the stories that you've shared and the experiences that you've had. So I'm sure our listeners will really enjoy what you've had to share with us today, Marlee. So yeah, thank you so much. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
And until next time.
Yes, likewise.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.